A very good evening and welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of some of your top business news stories of the day. Thanks for being with us. My name is Nzinga Kunta, and as usual, we begin with the number of the day. Today, that number is 0.9%. That's how much the World Bank is projecting South Africa's economic growth to be for 2020. The bank cut South Africa's growth from 1% in part due to electricity concerns. So if that number looks familiar, it's also because the Bank of America Merrill Lynch had bandied that number about first in May 2019, being the first bank to sound a warning about South Africa's less than 1% growth. So we know that the Reserve Bank MPC is meeting on Thursday, and they're also likely to revise downwards economic growth expectations for this year. We also know that the World Bank has slightly better projections for South Africa's growth next year at around 1.4% for 2021 and 2022 if a long list of reforms are implemented. But for now, South Africa's economic growth projected at a paltry 0.9% according to the World Bank, and that's our number of the day. Let's get more on this from Alexander Forbes chief economist, Isaah Mhlanga. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So what are the reasons for that lowered economic growth forecast?
I think there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you look at the global backdrop, we're experiencing a slowdown in economic growth. We have US economic growth, Euro area economic growth, we have Chinese economic growth, all slowing down. And these are three trading blocks globally, which means we do not have that lever that we used to have when South Africa's economic growth weakens. We tend to be helped by the global environment. That lever is not around. But then it also means that our economic growth has to be generated internally. And what are things that are required for us to improve our economic growth are the structural reforms, which National Treasury put together in their economic strategy document, which was published last year, August. But by nature, they are long-term, then they cannot be done over a short space of time. And we have not seen significant impetus in terms of implementation of those economic reforms, which is why we continue to expect low fixed investment, because confidence is based on those reforms being implemented. But I think for the short term, the biggest issue is Eskom's ability to provide electricity to South African economy. Our economy is very high energy intensive, which means with every load shedding, we experience a significant drawdown in our economic activity.
What does Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter say about how Eskom is going to try and solve its problems, and whether those will be a quick solution in order to help mitigate the problems you've mentioned?
I think what we heard today over the news as well was that the problems at Eskom are not going to be fixed overnight. They are structural. They're going to take some time, and that's quite concerning. We all know that. But it also means that the economy is going to be weaker for some time. So we should not expect a significant rebound. And this has significant implications for National Treasury as far as reducing the debt, as far as managing the budget quite appropriately. You know, from last year's MTPPS, National Treasury said they're going to cut 150 billion in terms of expenditure. It is exactly what a government should not be doing, especially if the economy is experiencing an economic slowdown. But unfortunately, because we have significantly high debt levels that are not sustainable, which means they continue to rise, also meaning our interest costs on that debt continue to rise, which crowds out or which takes away resources that can be used for other sectors of the economy. That's why National Treasury is embarking on the fiscal consolidation path, which they have announced in the budget.
There is a sense that although there are these measures, including fiscal consolidation, South Africa is almost certainly headed for a downgrade, despite some of the plans that have been implemented or want to be implemented by Treasury. Talk to us about that.
If you look at financial markets, in particular bond markets, they've already largely priced in the downgrade, simply because if you look at the countries that are in the City World Government Bond Index, South Africa's 10-year bonds are trading at the highest yield. If you look at currencies, you look at South Africa's rand relative to other emerging markets, it is the weakest if you take a one-year view from last year to date, which means currency markets have also priced in a potential downgrade. But what are the issues which Moody's and other credit rating agencies have highlighted as reasons for the potential or for the change in outlook which they did last year to negative from stable, and for the potential downgrade that may come is the implementation of structural reforms. which we know from now until February, nothing is going to be done. It's too short space of time for anything to be done. We can get announcements, but we've had a lot of announcements for the past 3 to 5 years, which has not been followed by vigorous implementation. So this time around, it's not going to be announcements that are going to deter a downgrade. It's actual implementation that is required.
The World Bank has said that for 2021 to 2022, South Africa, if these reforms are implemented, could see 1.4% growth. That still seems like a very anemic number for a country that President Cyril Ramaphosa in particular is selling as an investment destination with a workforce, infrastructure and the like. What's the problem?
Look, I think as far as being an investment destination, that's quite true. Remember, economic problems present opportunities for investors to solve those problems profitably. Those are the opportunities that exist in the South African economy and the African continent in general. But I think if you just look at the World Bank's forecast for next year, 1.4%, that is lower than our population growth rate. And if you have economic growth that is lower than population growth rate, you have significant problems. You can just go back 3 years ago when government announced fee-free higher education. Those guys have now completed their universities. They're looking for jobs. Where are the jobs going to come? It means you are sitting with a crisis because the economy is not growing fast enough. So we just need government to be quite ruthless and vigorous in terms of how they implement the economic reforms that are required. But we know the reforms that are required. The problem is there are so many vested interests from civil society, from labor, and within the political space itself, and also within business, which are preventing the implementation of growth-boosting economic reforms.
Surely there should be a sense of urgency among all of those who have vested interests in ensuring that South Africa does not fail, we do not get downgraded, the ramifications that come with that, and ensuring that we have adequate growth, at least 5%.
That's very true, but to think about 5% economic growth today, I think is almost a dream. We should really be realistic, think about 2.5% economic growth. That could solve some of our issues. But I think over and above what we've just said, it is quite important to identify where are South Africa's problems and stop talking about the first world problems. Say we need access to electricity, we need access to clean water, we need access to efficient transport, given our spatial planning for people to be able to be transported from work to home efficiently, cheaply. Those are some of our biggest problems. We also need access to water for farming. And we have dams that are still running dry despite some rainfall, which means the catchment areas or the infrastructure for catchment areas is not well planned. That is where we require investment. And once we can do that, we can establish a proper economy on which we can grow going forward.
Thanks so much for your time. On the bottom line this evening, Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes, Isaah Mhlanga, joining me in studio. Let's continue looking at the week ahead.